So let's talk a minute about focus. So the cameras that we use, whether you're shooting on your phone or you're using one of the school's video production cameras, have autofocus. And what that means is you basically have to point it in the right direction and the camera will focus for you. But it's important to understand how that works. The camera is going to measure two different things to focus: light and distance. The camera has a sensor in it that measures how much light there is. If there's not enough light, the camera is going to have trouble focusing. Or if there's a big change in the amount of light, you'll lose focus temporarily. Now the other thing that the camera measures to set focus is distance. It's going to measure the distance between the camera and the subject using a beam of invisible light. And that's fine as long as the distance between the subject and the camera doesn't change rapidly. If it does, then the camera will lose focus. This may happen if you're shooting sporting events. So how do you work to keep your subject in focus? Anytime you shoot, you have an area around the subject that stays in focus. That's called your depth of field. And you can make it really wide or really narrow. If you have a narrow or shallow depth of field, that means the subject is in focus, but everything around it, both the foreground and the background, are out of focus. If you have a wide depth of field, that means that pretty much everything that you can see is in focus. Now the obvious benefit to a wide depth of field is that the subject can move around and stay in focus. The benefit to a shallow depth of field is that because the subject is in focus and the background isn't, people will focus on the subject. So is it possible to change from a narrow depth of field to a wide depth of field? Yes. You can change the depth of field on your camera by zooming in or zooming out. The more you zoom in, the shallower the depth of field gets, and the more you zoom out, the wider the depth of field gets. Now if you're dealing with a camera without a zoom, like a cell phone, then you need to get a little bit trickier. Since my cell phone doesn't have an actual optical zoom, I'm going to cheat a little bit by taking the subject and moving it really far away from the background and then moving the camera closer to the subject. So if you want a shot that looks like it has a shallow depth of field without using a zoom, the easiest way to do that is to move your subject far away from the background and then move closer to the subject.